everybody, and welcome to the Launch No Code podcast. I am your host, Natalie Furness, and I have with me today Max Haining, the founder of 100 Days of No Code. Hi, Max. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to chat.
Yeah, no, before we start going deep on tools and all things Launch No Code, I have to ask you the same question I ask every founder that comes on the podcast. How on earth did you end up in this bubble, in this space that we call no code?
Yes, yeah, good question. Yeah, this wonderful, weird world that we find ourselves in. Yeah, it was pretty like serendipitous in a way. I stumbled across an article by Ryan Hoover, who was talking about sort of the rise of no code or the rise of the creator economy or something, and he sort of dropped in there like a little note about this wonderful world. And I was kind of like a kid in a candy shop and was like, oh my gosh, I need to look into that. And that was kind of where it started. And that sent me onto Twitter, and then obviously once you get onto Twitter in the no code space, it all hell breaks loose, and you just get completely embroiled in it. So yeah, that's kind of a very quick recap on how I got into the space in the first place.
Awesome. And of course, not only did you get into the space, but you have set up this amazing initiative to help other people who are getting into the space really get into the space with 100 Days of No Code. Where did this idea come from?
Sure, absolutely. No, thanks for the kind words. So essentially, before learning to no code, I had dared to think that I could actually learn to code. I basically came across 100 Days of Code, which is a big thing in the coding space. And it was a challenge that appealed to me. It was, time restrained, and it felt like it gave you a good structure. But I never really got around to it. But just my awareness of like, okay, so loads of people are doing this, and like this is a thing, kind of just stuck in my mind. So when I heard about no code, I kind of just made the connection that actually, if you're going to learn this thing, it still needs to be learned. Like you can do it over 100 days and can basically just take the same concept, but then apply it to this world that we're in. And it was the start of lockdown, so everywhere was closing. We had more time on our hands, so February or March 2020 of last year. And yeah, basically I just it was a very like selfish endeavor at that point in time. It was just me laying out 100 days because I had spare time on my hands to learn this new exciting skill. So that was kind of how it came about. And then since then it's steadily evolved into organically, I should say, into more of a community that people can get a part of and start learning to no code themselves. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about in the first place.
So you almost were inspired by the 100 Days of Code and then turned that into 100 Days of No Code.
Indeed.
It makes perfect sense. And I suppose the question that we all have related to 100 Days of No Code is, how do you decide what's on day one? Like, how did you decide that? Did you make a list of lots of tools and then kind of put them in order, or
Yep.
or talk to me about that process?
Of course, yeah. And to be honest, that's something we're still working out, is what do you do on that first day? But we are slowly like adding more structure to that process, because as like I used at the start of the call, you are like in a candy store. There's so many shiny like objects to pick up in no code that it is incredibly tough to actually like decide what tool to learn and build with. But the first day generally, I always recommend just getting your hands dirty and getting that like instant hit of gratification, like that aha moment when you're like, oh my gosh, like this is actually for real. You can actually legitimately make something in 5-10 minutes in some no code tools. So I always recommend just getting that instant hit, that dose, rather than like going into a big bad like complex tool such as Bubble,
Mm.
where it's going to take you, a good week or two to really like understand, oh, this is the power of this space.
Mm.
But for me, how I went about it, as the space was still very early, and as I was the first person going through 100 days of no code, as there was no one to like follow, I essentially just mapped out my 100 days into like 3 phases. So like a learn phase, um, a build phase, and then a launch phase. Because I had an idea at the time that was completely different to 100 days of no code that I wanted to bring to life. And yeah, that's kind of how I did it. But it was very loose. I didn't really know what I was doing. And thankfully now there's a little bit more precedence as to how to go about it.
Awesome. So you talk about these tools that have, very short learning curves that give you that kind of like instant gratification, or well, not instant, but worked for gratification quite quickly. Can you name any that you would recommend, say now? What kind of tools are we looking at here?
Of course, absolutely. So I definitely, yeah, would recommend something like Glide for mobile apps. I would look at Zapier for automation to sort of dip your toe in there. Um, for databases, which you're probably going to need to have in lots of your no-code projects, I would suggest dipping your toe into Airtable. And then for landing pages, something like Softer, really nice and easy to get started with. And then just like for internal kind of productivity stuff, Notion, and that like those 5 tools will just is a really nice like launch pad when you're just getting started, because they're super easy, or at least they can be easy when you're getting started, and they will give you a really versatile like
Mm.
toolkit, if you like.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a really nice stack. And I suppose reflecting on that, I've definitely used Softer for landing pages. I enjoyed that. Also, Card for landing
Mm,
pages. That's
yeah,
kind of a nice one that integrates things like easy email. Maybe, I
mm,
mean, people are using Mailchimp or MailerLite. Personally, I prefer MailerLite, but
yes,
that's a personal preference for me. Um, and what people don't realize is you can actually build quite decent landing pages on MailerLite as well.
yeah. I've never
Um,
done it myself. Can you? I've not really tried it, but yeah, it sounds interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's what we did all of our onboarding for Minimal Viable Stack
Oh wow,
was all through that.
wow.
So 100 people through that within 24 hours. So
That's good.
there is that capability. And this is why it's so
Mm,
nice to have these conversations, because we can share
mm,
ideas about, what are those best starter stacks.
mm,
Um, yeah, and I think that's great. So we've kind of got like that basis there. And
mm.
in terms of 100 days, do you spend sort of your time doing, say, going through all of the basics to start with and trying to build something, or do you just sort of get your hands in and just sort of do little bits here and there? How did you structure that 100 days for yourself in terms of learning?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, really good question. So to be honest, I did my 100 days like all wrong. Like I actually want to do it again. So I kind of did. I was like the test run, and then and then I kind of now since like telling people how to do it, and or at least there is no one way to do it, but like there are better ways than I did it. So I if you're coming into the space with like a very clear idea and project that you have in mind, I would still recommend starting just to pick up like the basic fundamental like cross-cutting principles that you're going to come across in any tool that you dabble in. So whether that is database design, if that's UX UI, whether that is kind of just responsive design, like those concepts that will apply to everything you're doing. I would say you still need to like get a basis in that. So that's kind of your starting point, and that's probably a little bit wishy-washy. So I would say get your hands into those tools that we discussed earlier in the call, those 5 tools that will all like test your ability to do those things. And then once you've picked up those concepts and and built up your confidence in those tools, and hopefully built some projects in those tools, then I recommend sort of moving up a notch and actually moving to that tool that you're probably likely to build that project, so that your sort of end game project that you've got in mind.
Mm.
But if you're just kind of you're just joining the space, you're there for the ride, you don't have a specific project, I would recommend basically picking a handful of tools that you really want to learn, and then breaking up your 100 days into sprints. So you're doing basically like research of the tool, getting the basic concepts, following along some tutorials, and then building something yourself in them. And you kind of just do like rapid cycles of that process in different tools over,
Mm-hmm.
say, your first 50 days, and then you can choose to do what you like in the rest of those 100 days. But
Mm.
that's kind of how I would recommend going about it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of nice in terms of you having almost like two options there. Like if you have an idea, come with the idea and figure out how you split your 100 days to end up developing your idea. Or if
Mm,
you don't have an idea yet, start with the basic stack of five,
mm,
learn them in sprints, and you're probably going to end up having an idea along the way. And who
exactly.
knows, when in this space everyone's pretty friendly, you might end up finding a co-founder
Mm,
while you're on that. And I mean,
yeah.
have you had experience of that within your community? 100 days no code, have people met co-founders and things like that within the community?
Yeah, they have actually. Yeah, there's been a few instances, and as you say, like the no code community is lovely. There are lots of people willing to collaborate, and often you can really like amplify the impact of your projects if you like, like connect someone that's like epic at design and then someone that's really technically focused, and that have a bunch of other like marketing and other skills. So I often really encourage like collaboration. And one example we had a little while back was combination of Edmund, Amoy, Kieran Ball, Michael Novotny. I can't think of the last person. There was someone else. Apologies. But yeah, basically they created the follow up, which is a site built on card, but is one that is meant to like hold organizations accountable to their promises on Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. So that was one that particularly like sticks out as one like, wow, four awesome people came together there and they were working on an awesome project.
Mm.
So but I can't think of that fourth person, so apologies.
That's fine. I'm sure we'll find them and we'll put
Yeah.
them in the comments in the podcast. No problem. I think, yeah, I think the only way I can sort of best describe it is this no code space almost reminds me a little bit of the open source space in the developer world.
Mm,
We're seeing that thing, but with people that can't necessarily code or don't have the time or patience or focus to be
yes.
able to learn to code, but they're still very creative. They've got great ideas. And in fact, they've got this maker builder mindset. And this is kind of that space where they can build without judgment, and build for the better as well. Like as you mentioned, like a
Mm,
project for Black Lives Matters, we've seen quite a few people with some ideas of building product studios focused on building products for purpose. I know
mm,
that Millie, Weekend CEO, she's doing some of that stuff.
mm,
Um, and I suppose this kind of brings me on to, the next topic, which is kind of the future of no code. Like, where are we going with this? Because right now I feel like we're in the very early innovator to early adopter stage, where we've got this bubble, we've got everybody talking about this, people getting excited, we're starting to see flickers from enterprises being interested. but
mm.
but where in your mind, Max, where is this going?
Yeah, the million dollar question. Yeah, I I always get scared of that question because it like is testimony to like the space that there are so many things that could happen, which is why it's
Mm,
such a difficult question to answer. But I mean, instantly when you were speaking there, I was like thinking about education and young people, and essentially schools and colleges training up these young people in no code, because whether they go on to actually become full-time visual developers, this skill can be applied to every aspect of their life. Whether that is automating their job, whether that's creating that like prototype that shows their manager that doesn't care about their idea but actually does once they see this thing live, or just like automating bits and bobs of their like normal everyday life. Like, I think that is where a lot of impact will come, is teaching young people in this skill, because it has such a like a multifaceted impact, yeah, on people's lives. So I'd say that's kind of like my inklings to like, okay, so we need to start educating younger people with this skill, especially now because there is a job crisis, especially amongst young people. So if we can start upskilling younger people in this skill, I think that would be huge. So that's kind of my like initial, very unformulated thoughts at this point in time. But yeah, there's bounds of opportunity. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, at the end of the day, we're making predictions based on zero data, just
yeah,
our gut right
yeah,
now.
yeah.
It could go any way. But you mentioned that sort of word job, and that's quite interesting to me. I mean, being in sort of having your finger on the pulse in the community as you do, have you noticed maybe more jobs or opportunities starting to come up for no coders? Have you, got any examples of maybe people who have been in your community that have ended up getting a job in no code?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing it more and more, especially over these last few months. So some people have come to me and said, "Look, I'm not sure, Max, if I've made the right call in diving into this space." Or at least those are the questions I was getting asked, maybe late last year, but now I'm getting those questions less and less, just because um, people are seeing like the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, enterprise companies are starting to like to hire, but also like the freelance space for visual developers is really like popping off. It's like um, there's internally and externally focused projects that are just really in demand. And I think there's something like 51 no code developer shops now, so or development agencies, and growing. So that just is
Mm.
testimony to like, wow, this base is legitimate, and you can charge for this skill that you're learning.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, why would an enterprise or an entrepreneur not want to build no code when it can be built, and a minimal viable product can be built in a fraction of the time at a fraction of the cost, and it can prove their business concept. I mean, to me,
Exactly. No
it makes
brainer.
business sense. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. But I think, as you rightly said, there's a lot of education to do in this space, and whether it be educating the future of visual developers and
Mm,
also educating entrepreneurs and enterprises on the benefits of building no code. So that's all very interesting. So I'm sort of coming around to my last few questions,
sure.
and these are more about you and your favorite tools, because of course you've dabbled, I'm sure, in lots of
Yeah.
different things, and you talked about the basic ones. But
Yeah.
what are some of your go-to tools, and what's your minimal viable stack that you like to use?
Course. Yeah, I don't know how like I really tempted to say some like exotic tools, but like my stack is reasonably boring. It's quite like a classic like no code stack. So basically some of the tools mentioned earlier, but Zapier for automation
Hmm.
is my go-to, just because it's like intuitive. And actually,
Hmm.
this is just before I kind of reel off these tools. I think my approach to using tools is how intuitive they are, because ultimately we're using them as a means to an end, an
Hmm.
output, rather than like um, using them for the fun of it. I mean, I know some people do, but like I don't. I'm very keen on just getting that thing done that I want to get done. So I look at the most intuitive ones, and for me, Zapier is the
Hmm.
best or most intuitive for automation, which is why I use it. Airtable for databases, for more automation stuff. And then like for landing pages, I will tend to use Softer. I find that to be the quickest tool to get a landing page out, but some would disagree. Card, I'm sure would be up there. And then or MailerLite sounds like it's pretty good as well. And in terms of other tools and just trying to think, yeah, those are like my my top my top three, and the red thread between them all is that they're very easy to use, and
Mm.
I optimize for that, um, or like lean towards that, because I came from a very non-technical background, and that's the reason why I love no code so much, because it allows or makes it accessible for people like myself who
Mm.
and yourself as well, and everyone in this space that doesn't or weren't able to build things beforehand.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, you've managed to, build a community, and not only a community, a paid for community.
Mm.
You are running a viable business through some of the things that you've built. And in terms of sort of the stack and the way that 100 days of no code works, how does that community work? Do you have a specific stack for onboarding people? How have you sort of built or put that together so that your community has the best experience?
Of course. Yeah, so keeping with that sort of minimal theme and that lean theme, the stack of the community is pretty simple, pretty lo-fi. So there's nothing like too tricky going on under the bonnet. But essentially, we use Zoom for for all our events and sort of onboarding calls. We use Airtable for our CRM. We use Slack as our kind of forum point of interaction for people in the community. We use Softer not only as our like front-facing landing page, but we use it as our back or our membership portal. So
Hmm.
that has all our resources on it, our perks, our um, sort of guides and tips and tricks for completing the 100 days. Has our manifesto, code of conduct, all these things. And then it also, weirdly enough, has our beginners course on it, which is very unconventional for Softer. So yeah, I've managed to wrangle that into Softer, the beginners course. So that's kind of the stack, and we use grain.co, which is a tool that sits on top of Zoom that allows you to capture like highlights from each Zoom call. So if members of the community can't make a call or something, we can take the highlights from each one and then share them with the community. So
That's really interesting, that one. Could you spell that for the audience just
cool.
quickly?
Yeah, so it's grain.co.
Yep.
And
Awesome.
yeah, really, really recommend that one as well.
Awesome. And
Mm.
what about payments? How do you
Oh
process
yes,
those? What's
good.
your
Yes,
stack
yeah.
for that?
Good question. Yeah, completely forgot about that. So Stripe. So we're using Softer's integration with Stripe to take the payments, and that's kind of works really well. So yeah, as you can tell, it's pretty lean, pretty minimal.
No, but I think, we don't have to make this complicated.
No.
And I think this was a conversation I was having with Ben from MakerPad, is that, no coders do have the habit of over engineering things.
Yeah.
And why over engineer things when you can do things faster, cheaper, simpler,
Mm.
and still achieve the same result? And that's what we're all about, really. It's about
Yeah.
getting that, solving the problem with the least amount of effort,
Yeah.
and giving people the most value for that as well. So I think that's a really nice place to sort of round up today. Thank you so much, Max, for your time on the podcast. And before we sign off of this, would you like to give a brief overview of where people can find you, reach out to you, and join your community?
Of course, yeah, and yeah, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, you can reach out to me on Twitter. That's where you'll find me generally at Haining Max, so HAINING, and then Max. Or you can visit our website, which is simply www.100daysofnocode.com. And feel free to message me on Twitter. My DMs are open, so always happy to chat. But yeah, thanks so much, Natalie, for having me on.